Whispers, Beyond the Veil. Episode 3, The Silent Doll. Chapter 1, Echoes That Linger. Evelyn Carter had escaped the house, or so she thought. But the scars left behind weren't just on her skin. They lived in the quiet moments, in the faint reflections of windows, and in the shadows that seemed to lean in a little too close. Sleep became a distant memory, haunted by dreams she couldn't escape, whispers she couldn't silence. One evening, desperate for answers, Evelyn found herself drawn to an old antique shop tucked into an alley she didn't remember walking through. Its faded sign read, "Agnes's Curiosities, Objects with a Past." As soon as she stepped inside, a chill ran down her spine, the air thick with dust and something that felt like watching. Chapter 2, The Doll That Waited. The shop was filled with relics from forgotten times, but one object held Evelyn's gaze: a porcelain doll perched on a cracked wooden shelf. Its glassy eyes seemed too real, following her every movement. Cracks spiderwebbed across its pale face, but it smiled faintly, as if it knew her. The shopkeeper, Agnes, emerged from the shadows, her voice low and brittle like old paper. "You feel it, don't you? The pull. That doll doesn't just belong here, it's been waiting for you." Against her better judgment, Evelyn bought the doll, convinced it held a piece of the puzzle she was trying to solve. Chapter 3, Whispers in the Night. Back in her motel room, Evelyn placed the doll on the dresser. Its presence felt heavy, an anchor dragging at the edges of her mind. That night, she awoke to a faint scratching sound. The doll had moved just slightly, its head now tilted, staring directly at her. Heart racing, Evelyn pressed her hands over her ears. But the whispers didn't fade, they grew louder, vibrating through her bones, filling the hollow spaces inside her mind. She dismissed it as exhaustion. But the next night, she found the doll at the foot of her bed. And then, one night, she awoke to find it sitting on her chest, its cold porcelain fingers resting lightly on her throat. The whispers returned, not just around her but inside her mind. Words she couldn't understand, layered voices overlapping, growing louder with each passing night. Chapter 4, The History Beneath the Cracks. Determined to understand the doll's origin, Evelyn returned to Agnes, demanding answers. The old woman confessed that the doll had been part of an ancient ritual, designed to be a vessel of prison for something that should never have been released. "It's not the doll that's cursed," Agnes whispered, her eyes dark with fear. "It's what's inside." Evelyn researched tirelessly, uncovering stories of similar dolls throughout history, objects tied to disappearances, madness, even death. The same pattern repeated. The doll found its owner, not the other way around. Chapter 5, The Possession Begins. Evelyn's mind began to fracture. She couldn't tell if the voices were real or echoes of her own thoughts. The doll appeared in places she hadn't left it. Its eyes seemed darker now, almost human. She started losing time, waking up in unfamiliar places with no memory of how she got there. One night, she awoke standing in front of a mirror, the doll cradled in her arms like a child, but the reflection didn't match. In the mirror, she wasn't holding the doll was holding her. Chapter 6, Breaking the Bond. Desperate to free herself, Evelyn sought out a ritual from Marcus's journal meant to sever ties between vessels and the entities within. But the ritual required a sacrifice, not an object, but a piece of her own soul. As she performed the ritual, the doll's face cracked further, dark tendrils of shadow leaking from within. The voices screamed, pleading, bargaining. Blood trickled from her nose, and her chest felt as if it were being crushed by invisible hands. But Evelyn didn't stop. With the final chant, the doll shattered, and for a brief moment, everything was silent. But as Evelyn stared into the shards scattered on the floor, she realized something horrifying. Her reflection was still moving. Slowly, it began to smile, even though her lips remained still. Then, it raised its hand to wave while Evelyn's hands stayed frozen at her sides. End of Episode 3, The Silent Doll.